Hello, welcome to another episode with Economics with Dr. Rajapathirana. We discussed many topics, why Sri Lanka is poor, total factor productivity, and we discussed about certain countries. And today we are going to talk about why certain countries develop faster than the others. So, Dr. Rajapathirana, thank you very much again for joining with us.
Yeah.
Dr. Rajapathirana, why actually now Sri Lanka, especially after I think we had a stabilization period, and then I think our revenue has grown, and some of the rating agencies have upgraded our rating. What's the next phase?
Next phase is to, I think on the trade side, which we have not done, move towards what is called open economy in popular parlance. And so we have still room for us to improve our international trade, all the relations with the rest of the world. Our protection rates are higher than our neighbors who are our competitors. So we have to deal with it. It's called outward-oriented trade policy. There's a famous work done in the late 1970s by Jagdish Bhagwati and Ankrika, who changed the whole way of looking at trade. First thing is that you can't isolate one thing and say we are doing trade of kaju. It must be in the system, right? For example, if you are promoting export, you can't say we are exporting shoes only. In order to export shoes, there are a lot of other things must happen. And so that is the outward orientation. So that if you don't look at it as a whole, then you have problems. Because right now what has happened in the world is that people break down the production process into parts. It's much more efficient than before. So then in order to export, you must import. And so if you are only trying to export, as we have been trying to do, that's not the good policy actually.
So you mean now after stabilization, we have to look, we have the outward oriented policy, and how can, like, what would happen when you do that? Or does it mean that during the stabilization period we haven't been outward oriented? Does it indicate that?
No, that's not the reason actually. That's a very good question, but that's not the reason, because stabilization is doing with macroeconomics, outward to do with trade. So there's a famous story that is, if you want to export, you must be able to import. Obviously now even more than before. Stabilization period is necessary to go through. So because of the stabilization, we were able to reduce the inflation rate to below 3%, starting with 70%. We have now reducing the fiscal deficit, which will also help to stabilization. And we have also evidence of it, as you have just said at the beginning. That is
rating agencies.
Rating agencies have put into CCC. Yeah, because, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so when it comes to outward oriented approach with, as you mentioned, with
Bhagwati and Kriya.
Yes, and yes. So how do we look at like Sri Lanka on the trade front? Does it mean like we have to what do we need to do, like cutting down tariff, signing more trade agreements, or what do we need? Action points, what do we need to do?
Action points is, I think, the tariffs and non-tariff barriers are also there. So the idea is that actually when you say outward orientation, it was not very well defined. I have told it to the authors.
Yes.
It is want the return to trade to exports is equal to the return to import substitution. That is the ideal. But you can't get to the ideal, but approaching it would be enough. And countries that have succeeded in exporting a lot and raising their standard of living have followed the outward orientation way of doing it.
So when it comes to bringing down, so you said there are tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers.
Yeah.
Could you?
Non-tariff barrier is that people ask for extra payments.
Okay.
That's a non-tariff barrier.
That's not non-tariff barrier.
Right there. Yeah.
Okay. And tariff barriers are basically, as you all know, you have very high custom duties
Yeah.
on certain imports.
Yes.
Can you explain, because there's also a sentiment that when you have high tariffs, that will encourage the local manufacturers to produce more competitively.
Yeah.
What's the economics take on that argument?
I want to say one word, wrong.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you elaborate a
Yeah, because
bit
actually
more?
you want to look at the cost of producing it. The cost of producing it. So if you have a comparative advantage, some country produces, say, shoes or bicycles, because they have competitive advantage, do it to export. But you can't export if you are not competitive. So putting barriers is exactly the opposite. Putting barriers on the import side we are talking about, right?
Yes.
Putting a barrier on the import is a tax on export, period. That is a famous what is developed by a student at the LSE, now a very senior man, who discovered what is called Lerner theorem. His name was Abapi Lerner theorem, who showed very, very simple arithmetic, not even mathematics, that to put an import duty is to tax exports by the same amount.
By the same amount.
Yeah, by the same amount, yeah.
So, Dr. Rajapathirana, we are discussing today on why some countries grow faster than the others. So, how, you mentioned, okay, we had the stabilization process. Now, the next stage has to be looking at trade.
Yeah.
Is it trade that brings growth, or like, if so, how does trade brings growth?
Number of things, not only trade.
Okay.
So the first part, in a way, we are almost completely done, stabilization. Why stabilization? Because if you don't stabilize, if the exchange rates and interest rates are popping up and down, you can't change anything. You can't make an investment if you don't know what is going to happen next. But having stabilized it, now we have low interest rate and low
Stabilizing exchange rate.
Then prices, of course, very important. Then you are now ready to do what are called more microeconomics, if you like, or another structural reforms. And the structural reforms can be improving. The trade part will take care of the competitiveness externally. Now we want to have competitiveness internally. So internally, to do that, we have to have a good regulatory system. I would say, don't be too excited about regulation. Like regulatory system, so that people are attracted to that whatever they are good at doing. That's the comparative advantage. So if somebody produces motor cars, as they are trying to do, that's a mistake. But if you produce parts of the motor car, which we can do, there are very successful people in Sri Lanka who have done those things. But you be very careful that as long as the person who makes the investment taking the risk, then you are assured that it will be a good choice. But if it is made by people, public servants sitting in the 10th floor or 12th floor, they don't have the competitive advantage to understand it. They are good people, but this requires commitment. That commitment usually is not found in public servants.
So, since you spoke about competitive advantage now, how can we assure a country like Sri Lanka, how can we identify the competitive advantage that we have? Or is it like a market-driven force, or how can we really, as a country, as a policymaker, are we, do we have to identify, or is it stemming up from the market?
Yeah, actually it will come from the people who want to invest. If the people have a competitive advantage, they can produce something cheaper than somebody else, then they produce and export it. So the bureaucrat cannot say, you should be producing this and that and the other. No, wrong. That will be wrong. But because they are not taking the risk, and then they don't have the interest as much as the people who want to risk their money. So
since you have worked in many countries in the region, when you say cars, since you mentioned that car example, manufacturing cars, what comes to mind for many Sri Lankans is the Japanese Toyota.
Yeah.
So what's the story of Toyota? Is it like how did the Japanese develop their car industry, or is there any government intervention, or whether it is coming from the as you mentioned, how did the competitive advantage they became so good on manufacturing cars? What happened?
Yeah, actually that's a very interesting story there. The bureaucrats there, whom I know, good people
In Japan.
They said you couldn't produce motor cars. Mr. Toyota is the one who started with Toyota because you have no comparative advantage. Right there showed that's the wrong thing to do. And so it was done by Mr. Toyota was given freedom to say you produce what you think you should produce. Don't listen to these bureaucrats.
Okay.
And so when I say that, they get very hurt. I can't say it. But they are fantastic, no? If you see in the United States, many of them are driving these cars, Toyotas, Camrys, most of the time. Decision was made by the people who were risking their money.
Right.
Yeah.
So if Mr. Toyota was listening to the bureaucrats, no Toyota cars.
Toyota cars. That is the biggest producer cars in the world today.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we were discussing about growth and why some countries grow faster. So is it always been a trade orientation where the countries
trade
grow?
is only one aspect.
Only one aspect. Okay.
I think if you take the first step, we do the stabilization.
Stabilization. Got it.
Now we can do other things, including trade.
Trade.
Then there regulatory environment, maybe getting together with other people, joining these groups, so that you can see how they are doing their business and you can actually work together. It's always better to work together. It depends upon the choice of partners you are going to have.
Interesting. So, Dr. Rajapathirana, now in Sri Lanka's case, okay, we've done the stabilization. You mentioned we have to move for trade. And you said trade is also one aspect. There has to be investment. There has to be other things that needs to come into play. So, how should we get there? Because I think there have been multiple stabilization programs in Sri Lanka. Every time when there's an IMF program, most likely there's some level of stabilization. Most of the time we haven't completed the IMF program, but at least there's some level of stabilization, because we have always, in multiple times, we have seen like extreme depreciation of the currency and some chaos. Of course, we saw the worst part of it in 2022. But now, if you were to list down actions, like this is what I'm going to do, action point, what we should actually do?
I'll say that is what public policy is.
Okay.
So we did not go to these earlier, but the point is now it is time to take it. We have to have good monetary fiscal policies. Last time what happened was that monetary policy went completely off the rails, right? And fiscal policy was very expansive there. Though you have fiscal deficit, then you run to central bank to say, now pay for this. So you can't do that. So now I think we are in that situation. We are not doing that. Our fiscal policy, monetary policy at last is good, come to a good point. As long if they can keep it this way, then we are going to be okay. But I'm going to deviate a little bit from the story. People are saying that the biggest producer of motor cars in the world is going to be our neighbor India. Okay. Not only that, South India.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they have the comparative advantage. What is their comparative advantage? They are English educated. They have been trained in this famous Indian Institute of Technology that Nehru introduced so many years ago, and they are ready to take on the world. So they will come. There are people say they might challenge Toyota or Japanese cars. There are many other good Japanese cars too. Yeah, and anybody else who is going to do well there must be able to do better than Toyota and the next Indian car. And of course, they have a big market also. I think that is the wrong way to think about it. We have a big market, we don't have, no, because we are looking at efficiency, little to do with the market.
Now, since you mentioned about the India, especially our neighbor, not only the entire India, that the South Indian states are going to be the biggest car manufacturers.
Yes, South India, yeah.
So there was when you always coined this argument, the same thing that you mentioned, because in India, there's a sentiment that they provided priority for the Indian brands like the Marutis, and
It's
there were
fine.
some import restrictions.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people try to replicate the same policy in Sri Lanka. So, if someone argues that India is now moving to the world's largest car manufacturer
Yeah.
because of the protection that they have provided for
Not
their
because
car,
of the protection.
Okay, how
I would say precisely because they are not protecting.
Okay.
If they protected, they won't be able to compete. That's it.
Okay.
So that they will do other things. They improve the education system. They are great engineers. There are great institutions there. So, and they are running the Indian trained economists and engineers are running the important parts of the American system.
So, since you have been with good friends of those Indian reforms with
Yeah.
people like Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and I remember he was saying in the interview that you conducted that at this difficult time there was a Indian manufacturer who came with the engine to the boardroom
Yeah.
and showed that, look, these pieces I cannot produce here; it has to be imported, and because of that, the protection has to be minimized. So, how do you? So do you still meant to say that the protection in India has been, is it easing down, or whether is there been a different aspect to it?
I assume protection is sleeping down.
Okay.
If they are going up or remaining the same, then they won't be able to compete with it. Because they are competing with the rest of the world. That today what's happening is that everybody is competing with the rest of the world. Even the small place somewhere can produce a part of the car. So I used to, when I talk about Sri Lanka, I say we produce parts of the BMW without telling them first that we are using that rubber band around. But that's our competitive advantage. So, of course, we are not going to stay like that. That's what happens in the rest of the world also. Then they start there with a strong competitive advantage. Then they move to other areas, or they get together with other countries, other companies that are going to produce cars or whatever. It's as important as being able to produce anything. Today, all the parts are trade. There are more trade in parts than in final goods.
Interesting. So we are discussing about growth, and in Sri Lanka, to grow, you brought the trade aspect and the investment. What else can be done? You earlier had spoken about the total factor productivity. Anything else, like how should we think about it, frame it, and get things going on the next stage?
Yeah, I think the short-term one was to get stabilization done. The next one, logical thing, is to do now to increase productivity and increase the spread of what we were producing or what we were exporting, change it to fit the situation that is now come about.
Dr. Rajapathirana, at the same time, now, however, the Sri Lankan policies we can see every time when we want to move to growth, now there's a conversation that we are going to impose new tariff on tire imports, for an instance, while we discuss about car manufacturing, tire imports. And every time what we see is a lot of local manufacturers who look for constant protection, claiming that for us to be competitive, we need government support, and they expect the support from a tariff barrier. Is there a way in a market economy that you can assist them? Because you mentioned by protecting them, having a tariff barrier, you are basically doing more harm than good for all of them.
Clearly.
Is there a way that, with your experience, how the governments or the taxpayers have assisted them rather than additionally, except the tariff protection?
Yeah, we'll do a little example. Say there are about, maybe, I'm not very sure about the exact number. I say there are about, say, 5,000 top-notch companies in the world that produce cars, motorcycles, planes, whatever. You will know that they did not come because of public support. They came because they realized that this is the thing they should do. Then they asked the government not to obstruct them. It's not the way going to the government and saying, well, we need your protection. No, don't obstruct us. Don't interfere with us. We can do this. So those are the people who have won. The Japans of the world, the South Koreas of the world. That's how they did it.
So government not to intervene is the best way that you can help.
No, because that means the people who are making decisions to produce something are the people who know it best. So it might tell the government, say, don't think of putting another barrier. May not be barrier for trade, for some other barrier in our neighborhood, because we need to have the land and the ability to, set up an industry.
Dr. Rajapathirana, anything else that we need to know about the growth and why some countries, so basically your argument is the countries have minimum government intervention and less trade barriers, and who has the monetary and the fiscal stability are growing faster than the others. But what about the institutions?
Oh, institutions very important. I left it out, but actually the people look at the Nobel Prize this time for economic sciences. These three people, Darren Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson. And the 2024 Nobel Prize for Economics went to them for looking at institutions, saying that countries want to grow, have very strong institutions. So therefore, another check we can do, if you see the countries that are very successful in producing for the market anything that they desire, that they know about, they have right good institutions. What are the institutions? Court system, regulation, so many things that gives room for people, those people to invest and to explore other ways of dealing, improving the performance of their companies and what they are going to create. I'll give you a good example. When the Second World War ended, with Germany and Japan losing, actually Germany using, they took very short time to get back to production. Mm-hmm. So 38, as we say, 38 was the 1938, 39 was when the war started. And countries started, Japan, United States, France started producing armaments. When the war was over, these people who had the strong invention, strong institutions, able to finish it within 7-8 years of the end of the war. That's remarkable. Okay. Also, another reason is something very interesting. In the First World War, they bombed everywhere. But in Second World War, they bombed only crucial nodal points. So that when the war was over, the rebuilding was not as challenging as the end of the First World War. Yeah.
Interesting. Also, my final question on this one. So, when you mention that why certain countries grow faster, is it because they are in the manufacturing sector, or is it because...
Very good question. Nothing to do with manufacturing.
Okay, but look at your examples. The South Korea, Japan, aren't they on the manufacturing? I'm just counter-arguing your...
No, I will say a country that has... if you say manufacturing, all the developed countries have manufacturing, but they also have agriculture. Who is the biggest exporter of agricultural products in the world? Do you know?
United States?
Yeah, United States. Australia. So people, unfortunately, in this country also equate growth and this thing as because of industry. No, industry is good, but it's one of the things. There are other things we have to do, as I do, looking at the whole thing together, rather than saying, well, we are going to do this because we are advantaged in it.
You mean also the US and Australia are better in agriculture and manufacturing because they have the competitive advantage? Is that what you?
Yeah, absolutely. A huge amount of land, great type of cultivation, huge land. They had to go from helicopters from one end to the other to to produce fertilizer and things like that, distribute fertilizer. So we should not be stuck with saying we have to do industry. If somebody in a bank discussion say we have no comparative advantage anything, that's the worst statement you can make. You have comparative advantage in something, and it might not be producing something. It may be teaching, it may be dancing, whatever. Comparative advantage do that. So you cannot decide first of all why what you should be producing, because United States didn't do that. Neither did Australia. Neither other countries are doing. Their system came up mostly through private enterprise. The government didn't intervene. When they intervened, were to remove barriers rather than promote or try to give a special place to that particular industry.
Thank you, Dr. Rajapathirana. I think you have few corrections to be made from our very first episode.
Yeah.
Minor corrections. You want to first highlight? I think there's a on the per capita GDP. You have a.
It was like $4,000 before we had all the COVID and all the other problems. So in my reference to that second time, I said 400. So this should be 4,000.
4,000.
Yeah.
Which is understandable. Anything else that you need to recorrect? That's about you mentioned about the salary scale of.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I'm very sad, embarrassed. When I got my first job in the central bank, should I say what to you? 1965. My mother had been a teacher for 42 years. So I won't mention the amount, but it was less than what I got in my first salary. Although my mother was a first-class trained teacher. There were no universities at that time. First-class trained teacher gets a salary lower than mine. So many years of work and excellent work. And so teachers were completely neglected. Now they are made up. I think that teacher salaries are good.
But I think still there's a lot of areas for improvement.
Yeah, a lot of areas for improvement. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rajapathirana. Thank you very much for joining us today again to discuss why some countries grow faster than the others. As Dr. Rajapathirana mentioned, stabilization process is over. Now we have to move and shift gears for growth. And growth may not be easy as stabilization. You have to do reforms, and we have to focus on trade and have that outward orientation and build institutions. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajapathirana. We are looking forward to seeing you with another conversation, Economics with Dr. Sarath Rajapathirana. Thank you. Stay tuned. We will see you with another video.